Well, thank you, Vice-Chancellor Michael Goenda, the Director of the Centre of Advanced Journalism, the Chancellor. Ladies and gentlemen, well, of course this is an election campaign, but this is not an election campaign speech. But it is a campaign speech. It's a speech about another subject, and one I think is important, and for which I was pleased to accept Michael's invitation to speak to the Centre for Advanced Journalism, because even though I've had much to do with journalists over the years, and I'll let you in a secret, I do really like journalists, even though a lot of them don't think I do. I was therefore delighted to accept the invitation and to think about what subject I might address. And the one running through my mind, and had been, is the one I've chosen for tonight. So I go on a bit here tonight. If you haven't had a comfort stop, you'll need one at the end. But nevertheless, you'll have to bear with me. I start out with a quotation, and you'll pick up the resonances of it. It says, "The press is overstepping in every direction the obvious bounds of propriety and of decency. Gossip is no longer the resource of the idle and of the vicious, but has become a trade, which is pursued with industry as well as effrontery. To satisfy a prurient taste, the details of sexual relations are spread broadcast in the columns of the daily papers. To occupy the indolent, column upon column is filled with idle gossip, which can only be procured by intrusion upon the domestic circle. In this, as in other branches of commerce, the supply creates the demand. Each crop of unseemly gossip thus harvested becomes a seed of more, and in direct proportion to its circulation results in the lowering of social standards and of morality. Even gossip, apparently harmless when widely and persistently circulated, is potent for evil. It both belittles and perverts. It belittles by inverting the relative importance of things, thus dwarfing the thoughts and aspirations of a people. When personal gossip obtains the dignity of print and crowds the space available for matters of real interest to the community, what wonder that the ignorant and thoughtless mistake its relative importance." Now, of course, a few elements of the language are a giveaway that the piece wasn't written by me or written yesterday. But the content is highly relevant to a discussion about privacy and the media, as a trip to the local newsagent or time spent in front of the television or online will quickly affirm. The quote is from The Right to Privacy by the Boston lawyers Samuel Warren and Louis Brandeis, published in the Harvard Law Review in 1890, perhaps the most famous attempt at a definition of privacy. Warren and Brandeis wrote that the right of the individual to be let alone, I repeat that, the right of the individual to be let alone, a right they put alongside the right not to be assaulted or beaten, the right not to be imprisoned, the right not to be maliciously prosecuted, the right not to be defamed, is a key right. They of course acknowledged that the right to be let alone was not absolute and must on occasion give way to a higher or general public interest. Of course, none of us can assert that we should be left alone perpetually. However, they said, and let me quote them further, "The design of the law must be to protect those persons with whose affairs the community has no legitimate concern from being dragged into an undesirable and undesired publicity, and to protect all persons whatsoever, their position or station, from having matters which they may properly prefer to keep private made public against their will. It is the unwarranted invasion of individual privacy which is reprehended, and to be as far as possible prevented." Warren was said to have been prompted to write this after a newspaper published the guest list of an A-list dinner party he had hosted in Boston, and Brandeis went on to become a Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Well, of course, both writers would turn in their respective graves at developments in the 120 years since. Whole industries now revolve around so-called celebrity, fame, rumour and gossip, often more correctly straight fiction, which is published these days often by media organisations. These organisations proclaim the importance of free speech in the dissemination of news, but clearly are more at home in the entertainment business. The Warren and Brandeis concept of privacy strongly influenced the development of the law in the United States and elsewhere, although, as others have pointed out, the right to be let alone as a bald statement is meaningless. Of course, a person engaged in criminal activity has no right to be let alone. And of course, it is difficult to distinguish from other legal concepts such as assault or nuisance and interference with bodily integrity. But privacy has been enshrined as an internationally recognised human right in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and Australia is a party to both. Article 17 of the Covenant states, "No one shall be subjected to arbitrary or unlawful interference with his privacy, family, home or correspondence, nor to unlawful attacks on his honour and reputation." And 2, everyone has the rights to the protection of the law against such interference or attacks. Freedom of expression is also an internationally recognised human right in Article 19 of the Covenant. It says these rights are not absolute, sometimes conflicted, and often need to be balanced and reconciled. Importantly, and this I think is a really important point, free speech means freedom governed by law. Privacy, in a broad sense, is under attack these days on a range of fronts. Electronic surveillance, terrorism laws, growing police powers, these peek and seek provisions, police coming to your home, cleaning your computer, putting bugs in your telephone, business practices associated with information mining and marketing and new technologies. And the battle Warren and Brandeis fought against the evil of gossip has been well and truly lost in the passage of time. However, the right to what I might call privacy remains an issue, particularly where to draw the line between freedom of expression and any remaining right an individual has to have some control over the gathering and publication of information about personal aspects of their life, and what can or should be done when that line is crossed. I take issue with and repudiate those who assert that privacy in modern times is dead and we should get over it. People say this, look, don't go on about it, it's all over. And with those who claim the current framework within which the media deals with privacy issues and concerns is effective and works well. It is, of course, ineffective and works in the main to the benefit of media organisations. I also want to lend support to the case made strongly and convincingly in 2 Law Reform Commission reports that you won't see widely reported or subject to objective analysis in the media, that the law should provide recourse in the event of an unwarranted serious breach of an individual's privacy by the media or anyone else for that matter. These issues are topical owing to obvious examples of questionable calls about balancing privacy and freedom of expression, and they're there for all to see. Some leaders of the industry and the profession dismiss errors as unfortunate, inevitable and rare, and claim a strong and continuing commitment to ethics and values that include respect for privacy. I know many good editors and journalists struggle with these issues. In fact, every editor must struggle with them every day, conscious of their responsibilities to get it right and the harmful effect of getting it wrong. But many, like me, have the impression that the tone at the top and the practice of journalism in many media organisations is driven by other more pressing values. Of course, it's hard to generalise, but Margaret Simons, who authored the book The Content Makers, suggests, and research by Dennis Muller for his PhD at this university in 2005, and with 27 years' experience in the profession, confirmed, ethics do not enjoy a high profile in the newsroom. Indeed, many of those involved apparently have little more than a passing knowledge of the issues. Ethical considerations can complicate life for those keen to get the story. Muller described it as a pretty sorry picture. Or as Professor Mark Pearson put it, and I'll quote him, "The reality is that editors and news directors are motivated as much by circulation and ratings as by a public duty to deliver the news. There may be a range of profits or costs resulting from a story involving a privacy intrusion, including gained or lost circulation or ratings, advertising, syndication rights, corporate reputations, legal damages, and court or regulator costs. There's little doubt journalists go through such a process, either formally or informally, when deciding to run a story that pushes at the privacy margins. Often questionable calls involve people in the news for other reasons. Photographs claimed to be of a red-headed woman engaged in politics, scantily clad in a motel room with someone else 30 years ago, of an apparently happily married government minister leaving a gay men's haunt, or of a so-called celebrity in the shower. The rights and wrongs of these calls tend to become topics of discussion themselves. Probably much more frequently, although no one seems to keep tabs, individuals going about their daily life or momentarily caught in the spotlight then become the subject of a questionable call. Those leaving court, particularly where they react angrily to being filmed, as always seems to have news value, as did a full front page photo of a family that heard the news of the death of a family member for the first time in Victoria's bushfires last year. Then there was the photo in Sydney papers last year of two small children, faces not visible, but children of a murderer just convicted, one child wearing a school uniform on the way to school. And in another, a badly injured and distressed son whose parents had been killed in a boating accident, angrily seeking to avoid a camera recording his stretcher-borne arrival at hospital. Just about any day in the tabloids and any night on a current affair or Today Tonight, you will see examples including foot-in-the-door interviews claimed to be necessary and justified by the media's right to know and to publish just about anything they like. The issue of media and privacy is also topical owing to proposals in a 2008 report by the Australian Law Reform Commission on Australia's privacy laws. The report, the result of 2 years' research, consultation and analysis, runs to 2,700 pages in 3 volumes. It put forward 295 recommendations for change with the general aim of modernising, simplifying and streamlining laws that are generally seen to be dated, complex, confusing, fragmented and full of gaps and inconsistencies. 4 recommendations are of direct relevance to the media. None have yet received a response from the government. They propose changes to, but continuation of, the largely self-regulatory arrangements that are a condition of the exemption which media organisations enjoy from privacy law. The Australian Law Reform Commission argued changes were necessary because of ongoing concerns about the capacity of the self-regulatory system to preserve that tenuous balance between the public interest in freedom of expression and the public interest in adequately safeguarding the handling of personal information. This important report also recommended legislation to establish a general statutory cause of action for breach of privacy. A general statutory course of action for breach of privacy, but subject to a number of qualifiers to ensure the protection of other public interests. One of the reasons given was to create more certainty for everybody, including the media, as to legal rights, rather than leave the law entirely to case law with judges developing the common law over time. The Commission supported an argument by yet another report, a separate report, by the New South Wales Law Reform Commission in 2008, made clear the proposal for a statutory cause of action is not aimed specifically or solely at the media. The proposal is for a right to seek redress for a serious interference to privacy, including interference with an individual's home or family life, unauthorised surveillance, or where an individual's correspondence or private written, oral or electronic communication has been interfered with, misused or disclosed. Of special interest to the media, of course, is that it would also extend to an interference with privacy involving disclosure of sensitive facts relating to an individual's private life, subject to a rider concerning the public interest in people being informed about matters of public concern, and the public interest, of course, in freedom of expression, which must accompany it. Well, reaction to the Law Reform Commission's report, not limited to the proposed cause of action, took on an end-of-the-world, as we know it, tone in some media circles. The report and recommendations were dismissed by industry leaders such as John Hartigan of News Limited and the Australia's Right to Know Coalition on the basis that the current media privacy framework is effective and working well. Hartigan asserted, and I quote him, "There are very few complaints, investigations and breach findings against the media for breaches of privacy." The Australian's Legal Affairs editor, Chris Merritt, labelled the report outrageous. On the cause of action, an editorial in The Australian set up a marvellous straw man. Privacy, it said, is important, but it would be a serious mistake to remake the rules governing the operation of the media by enshrining privacy as an inalienable right, which at all times and in all circumstances trumps all other considerations. But they said this despite the fact that the Australian Law Reform Commission specifically stated the cause of action should only be available for a serious breach and, I quote them, privacy interests are not to be privileged over other rights and interests. In other words, if there is a public interest, a clear public interest, there is no precedence in privacy over it. Well, there were confident predictions from some that the proposal, if acted upon, would put an immediate end to investigative journalism, notwithstanding that the Commission concluded the proposal, and I quote it, should not hinder legitimate investigative journalism as described by media groups to this inquiry. For example, allegations of misconduct or corruption in public life would not fall within the proposed zone of protection. Some media voices called for calm consideration, suggesting a need to get the house in order before jumping to the barricades. Jack Waterford, the editor-at-large at the Canberra Times, while mindful of the need to protect freedom of the press and freedom of speech, as you would expect, commented about the wave of criticisms of the Commission's report, particularly in News Corporation, News Limited publications. With an eye for self-interest, when he saw it running, Waterford said, and I'll quote him, "The public ought to be quite cynical of the fact that some sections of the commercial media thrive and profit from invading the privacy of celebrities, starlets, models, and sometimes ordinary non-consenting members of the public who've stumbled into a public spotlight. Trivial gossip has become bigger and bigger business in most cases with the implicit consent of most of the victims, but has very little to do with the public interest or with reasons why the media can or ought to be able to claim that in respect of its monitoring of the exercise of public power, it is acting in the public interest." That's from Jack Waterford of the Canberra Times. Matthew Ricketson of The Age thought some of the claims for free speech for the media celebrity industry were simply laughable. He said this, "In the weeks leading up to the release of the Australian Law Reform Commission's massive report on privacy, the Right to Know Coalition has been sounding the alarm at the prospect of a new law against invasion of privacy. Privacy threat to celebrity coverage was the headline in the media supplement of the Australian on July 31, 2008. I'll repeat it, privacy's threat to celebrity coverage. And it began this. Its lead story, the celebrity media industry could be thrown into turmoil by moves to restrict reporting on public figures. Am I the only person, Ricketson asked, who thinks this reads rather like an item in the satirical American newspaper The Onion or an outtake from The Chaser? Well, Matthew Richardson, no, you're not. But another prominent industry leader, Mark Scott of the ABC, also broke ranks in suggesting that the media should seek to negotiate a suitable outcome on the proposed statutory cause of action rather than leave the development of the law in the hands of the courts. But let me for a minute return to those questionable calls. News Limited's The Daily Telegraph conceded that the redhead alleged to be in those photos published last year in the lead-up to the Queensland election, Pauline Hanson, in fact wasn't her, and according to reports, settled a legal action she commenced soon thereafter. The Deputy Editor's first go at defending the publication of what at the time the Telegraph insisted were photos of Hanson was, quote, the public interest. When questioned about the precise public interest involved, she said, that's for our readers to tell. That will be determined by the number of people that buy the paper. Now, this is how brazen it's become. A bit similar to the line of the then editor of the same paper, who at the time defended the publication online of a photo taken by a phone camera of Sonny Bill Williams and the actress Candice Falzon in flagrante in a toilet cubicle with a door closed at a Sydney hotel. He told Monica Attard, that's the editor of the Telegraph, it is currently the second highest read story of the year so far. The readers clearly loved it. So there you have it then. The readers loved it, you take it. Hanson would not have succeeded under the proposed cause of action because she claimed, and news publications eventually conceded, it was not her in the photos, so there was no serious breach of her privacy. Whoever it was in them has not stepped forward, perhaps with an eye to maintaining privacy about something that happened 30 years ago. But this is worth noting. The public apology by the Telegraph editor to Hanson was that the photos were of someone else. In other words, in the apology says, well, don't worry, the photos were of someone else, suggesting that had they been of Hanson, the public interest lay in their publication, despite the passage of time and the irrelevance of the event to her campaign for office. Peter Meakin of the Seven Network initially defended the outing of the New South Wales Transport Minister David Campbell through footage taken from the street of Campbell's leaving Kens of Kensington in Sydney, as in the public interest, that being in his use of the government-provided car Campbell used to drive there. This was quickly dropped when it turned out there had been no breach of any rules or guidelines for the use of Campbell's vehicle. So other claims about the public interest in knowing the details of the private life of a Minister of the Crown were quickly rolled out. The incident, of course, raises the issue of whether anything done in public, that is, whether you're leaving a gay haunt through the front door, visible from the street, for example, can be regarded as private. Mark Day, for example, argues that everything done in public is open slather to the media. Expectations of complete privacy in a public space for any of us, of course, have to be lower than, say, even a decade ago, and those of someone in public life even lower. But all of us should have a right to go about entirely personal business in the public domain. On privacy in the shower, the picture taken of Lara Bingle from a distance through a window, the AFL cleared Brendan Favola in March over his part in the publication of that picture in the Woman's Day, and elsewhere on the grounds there was insufficient evidence to show he had distributed the photograph taken while the pair were having an affair in 2006. It was reported in March that Bingle was suing Favola for breach of privacy, defamation and misuse of her image, prompting News Limited lawyer Justin Quill to almost chortle while offering his free legal advice in an op-ed published in the Herald Sun. Quill said this: there is no right to privacy in Australia. I can write that a few different ways if you like, but it won't change the position. You hear a lot of people talking about their right to privacy, but unless they're talking about some moral right to privacy, they're talking about something that doesn't exist in this country. Taking a photo of a woman in the shower and distributing it is unquestionably reprehensible on any view, he said. But we shouldn't feel so sorry for Bingle that we demand a privacy law. Quill acknowledged she might possibly have a claim for breach of confidence, but on privacy rights she had nothing. And that, of course, right from the relevant authority in the land, the News Limited lawyer. Managing privacy must be part of a broader framework concerning ethics and values in journalism, an essential framework given the media's exercise of significant public power, privilege and the potential to cause harm. I mean, I think this is true. The media's exercise of significant public power, privilege and the potential to cause harm. This framework is in fact key to the conditional exemption media organisations enjoy from the Privacy Act. The Privacy Act was introduced by the Hawke government in 1988. It initially applied only to the federal public sector and to credit reporting. In 2000, the Howard government extended the Act to cover big business. Media organisations were granted a conditional exemption for acts and practices in the course of journalism from the provisions of the Act. The fact that an exemption was given reflected the importance attached to the public interest in freedom of expression and the free flow of information in our democratic society. The imposition of conditions was an attempt to balance the public interest in freedom of expression and the public interest in adequately safeguarding the handling of personal information. Significantly, all that is required to enjoy the exemption is for a public commitment by a media organisation, a company, to observe standards of privacy in the course of its journalism and that those standards be published in writing. That's it. That's all they have to do to earn and enjoy the exemption. Most print and all broadcast media seek to satisfy these conditions through codes or principles that apply to the conduct of their functions under the auspices of an industry group. In the case of broadcast media, there are a number of industry bodies that operate in a co-regulated system under the Broadcast Services Act, administered by ACMA, the Australian Communications and Media Authority. 7 separate codes apply to commercial television and other forms of broadcasting. Non-compliance with a registered code may give rise to issues concerning such things as the continuation of the licence or the imposition of licence conditions. The ABC and SBS, in fact, have their own codes. The print media is self-regulating, with most of the industry members of the Australian Press Council subject to its statement of principles and standards. Members, journalists mostly, members of the Media, Entertainment and Arts Alliance, but not other journalists, are bound by its code of ethics. Estimates of MEAA coverage vary from the Alliance's claim of 80% to something around 50% by others. Some large media organisations have their own code and train to a standard that may differ from the MEAA code. Commercial television stations, through Free TV Australia, undertake to comply with the 2010 Code of Practice, registered as a code under the Broadcasting Services Act. In other words, it's all over the place.